I think to begin, I'm just hoping that you could just give your name and how long you've been with Unarius, please.
Kevin, since 1976.
Jack, and since 1988.
Celeste, since 1987.
Jennifer, since 1976.
And I think just to, well, definitely if you have questions, we can get to them. And as Kevin was telling me earlier, you can just ask anything, right? Whatever you.
Anything.
All right. Keep that in mind. So I think, at least for me, what I get when I'm watching this is I'm thinking about how often I'm looking for something that I resonate directly with. That's when I know, okay, this is true, or it's correct, or it's right. And I'm wondering, probably, if you can just talk about how that began for you, or if that's the way that you got into Unarius, or anything like that. Is it because of that kind of revelation, okay, this is right for me, and what was that like?
Yeah, as weird as it sounds, I got into Unarius at 17, and I had been involved with Est, TM, studied a little bit of Buddhism. Of course, I'd read all the Don Juan books, and so I was a searcher. And when I came in contact with Unarius for the first time, exactly because it laid out a logical sequence of here's what's happening with your life and here's how it works. And I always felt like when I was growing up, somebody handed out the textbook on what life should be, and they didn't give me one. And so when I came to Unarius, I was like, wow, life does make sense. Just somebody didn't give me the textbook. So after that, it was just I began to study, and I began to see these things work. And that was my big deal too, is that I wanted something practical and pragmatic. And if it didn't work, if someone just said you just got to believe because you got to believe, I could care less because I'd already been through this other stuff. So that's how I made my contact. And I don't want to take away from this, but because we just watched this, it's so fresh in my consciousness, and I want to stress this to everybody who saw us up there doing these things. And somebody said to me once, well, how did you guys do these? What was involved? And there's 45 to 50 of us who were inhibited, insecure people. Ruth Norman came down to one of our classes. She just looked us in the eye and she said, you guys are going to make films, you're going to make videos, and you're going to be surprised at what you can do. And all of us were like, are you kidding me? So it was an amazing act of faith and belief in us as artists, as people. And we knew that these were for us, so that we could learn and grow and become better people. But we all knew I'm not an actor. There's no doubt. Watch the film. But it was cathartic. And so while some of the stuff is way out and it's crazy, it was the most wonderful, giving, loving thing that anybody had ever done for me, and very healing. Anyway, I thought I'd share that.
Anything you want to add, or no? I guess not. Okay. Anything that you'd like to add about your experience in connecting with Unarius, and I guess also what making the art did for you?
Well, it helped me to grow. When I made contact with Unarius, I was a student at San Diego State University, and through a boyfriend, who got into Unarius, Dennis McNabb. So I had to really search myself to see was I really interested in this and what's going to happen to my relationship with my boyfriend. That's really how it started. But in reading the books and having my own experiences, then I started to see, and I started to be able to view my past life, be able to have access with these higher spiritual beings, as talked about. And I took part in the films, and I had those experiences. So then it was validated for myself. So, and at the time, then our relationships with each other grew, and my relationship with Uriel grew as well. And I just kept testing it every step of the way, because it wasn't just a thing to blindly do. You really had to put your heart and soul into these sets and every time we put on a costume, we were actually reliving those past lifetimes. And the idea was to work out, called the psychodrama, to actually get into that role and to have that experience, and then after, be able to look back and to see who we truly were.
Do you have a question, Judy, that you want to pose, or?
Yeah, were you one of those girls running around in the fake fur and Bruce the Earthman?
Yes. Girls. I don't have the outfit though, that's for sure.
But I want to know what that was like. I know it was cathartic, but it must have also been kind of like really fun and crazy, right? Too.
Yeah.
I mean, all of you guys out there on the hill.
It was. It actually became like a, living up, because it was up away from San Diego. We would go and do some of the filming, build the huts. I mean, we were actually living up there. So we did feel that we were actually, living that for a matter of months and weeks. So, yeah.
And didn't your parents kind of have an issue with Unarius? Like, you were doing some really far out things on the hill in fake fur with all these bare-chested men and ball statues. Like, how'd they respond to that?
I don't think they knew about all of it.
I can honestly answer that, because I've said this before to you, and it was just, my mother is English, which means she's repressed and very inhibited. And I can count on my hands the number of times she hugged me growing up. So, she first sees me in one of these videos, and it's just like, I mean, literally her face just went white. I thought I raised you better than that, But, the funny thing is that after doing this for years, and, I was just doing what I was doing, and the more I did it, the more fun I was having, the more loving I became, the more uninhibited I became. Years later, it became, well, whenever there was an issue in her life, I was the first of her siblings or her kids that she would come and talk to, because she knew I wasn't going to be judgmental. I was the guy that ran around in loincloths, so I was not going to, be judgmental about whatever she was going through. And it was, again, as Jennifer was saying, for like the Roots of the Earthman filming, we lived at that site for months, and in the cold, and we built the huts, and the guys were running around in next to nothing. But we were all 18 to 24, so we could do that, and it was fine. But most importantly, it was that whole thing of overcoming the inhibitions, overcoming the insecurities, and learning more about myself by doing those things. And as an 18 to 20-year-old, and you're out doing these way out things, and at that time it was not, it wasn't like, gosh, you're one of the cool people, you're reliving your past lives, and you're being involved in film. No, it was, and the only thing I can say is you might as well put an X on my back and say, weird person. And so it required a lot of soul searching and but the more I did it, the more benefit I got. So that's why, I stuck with it.
And now your mom thinks Unarius is great.
She loves it.
Because your
Loves
nieces think you're cool?
Oh yeah, my nieces, because I was the cool guy who did all this way out stuff, and they talked to my mom about it. My mom, you'll love this. So I said, oh yeah, we're going up to San Francisco. They want us to have it at the San Francisco Film Festival. And she just was like, really? Well, so now it's changed completely too. I'm now, her best son.
Jack, I really want to hear from you. I was wondering, as I was watching the movies, how old is the world? Do you know?
I really don't. How far back do you go? We take it back to other planets, and a million years, I think is probably far enough. Yeah, it's in one of our books that we talk about a civilization a million years ago, and many lifetimes that we've lived since then. So there's a lot of information we have that's been going to create what we express now, because that's the premise of what we're being taught down there, is that everything we've done stays as a part of you. Everything you do now is what's going to be what you're going to be in your future. So whenever we have an issue or anything that you want an answer to, you connect the dots between now and some past experience.
Did you want to take questions from the audience, or did you want to ask another?
Oh, do you want to say something, Celeste?
Oh, yeah, please.
Yeah, when I first found out about Unarius, I actually had started working in El Cajon. It was my first big job out of college. I was supervising a recreation center and park not too far away. And I was new to El Cajon. I live in the beach area, and I thought it was kind of a rednecky community. And so then when I drove by the center and it has display windows like a retail shop, I was like, oh my gosh, what is this place? And I thought it was pretty far out. I wasn't ready then. I was in my 20s. And then as time went on, and a couple of years went by, I kept thinking, yeah, sometime I'll have to, after work or lunch, I'll have to go in there and check it out. And it wasn't until the 80s that I really was searching for answers like, why am I here? Okay, I've got a job. You know, I've done these things, there's got to be more to life, what am I supposed to be doing? And then I got involved in some situations that I was trying to really understand. A lot of emotions came up. And I hired someone to work at the rec center, and she had gone to Unarius, and so she started talking to me about it, and I came to a class with her. And at that point, it was like, wow, this is just amazing, the intelligence in the books. You can tell it just didn't come from a common person. It truly is from out of this world, more intelligent beings. And I felt uplifted mentally above all the emotional turmoil to try to get some clarity. And then they said, oh, well, Uriel's going to come down. She wasn't there all the time for the weekly classes for a special event, and are you going to be here? And I came into the center where they hold the classes and the events. And I wasn't a real psychic person at all, but I could already feel the energy, the love energy. And when she walked out, it was like she had ray beams coming out of her eyes because she was so connected with her own higher self. And I just felt this tremendous love energy from her, and I knew I had found what I was looking for. And so I've been involved ever since, and certainly had an opportunity to learn a whole lot about myself, and definitely to change my life for the better. So I'm very appreciative.
I want to say one thing before we open it up to questions. What impresses me so much and fascinates me about Unarius is even if you don't believe in reincarnation or other worlds or anything like that, like there's clearly something, you don't have to, because there's clearly something psychological that was like working with this whole thing that you guys did, because each of you, and I've heard from other Unarians too, the guy with the blue face, you know, who was like crying and screaming out, right? He had a radical healing with Unarius, correct? And didn't he have like issues with his sight? Like he had these big thick glasses. He actually got healed of eye issues. And then he went on to, he was a music prodigy. He went on to build this synthesizer. He actually is the guy who, he performed all the music for The Arrival. So the score for The Arrival is by that guy. And then my final question is, tell me about Satan. Tell me about, there's a bad guy in so many of the different lifetimes, and didn't he end up becoming like really best friends with Uriel in the end? There was like a healing of Satan that happened. What was that all about?
Oh, sure. For years, when I first contacted Unarius, and the whole premise of Unarius is, first, and I want to talk about this too, is because as you watch us doing these things, Ruth Norman never said, you're going to do this, and then you're going to do this, and you guys are musicians, you're going to do this. It was up to each one of us to take part in it and do it and make it our own and embrace it. And that was the whole idea, is if you're not engaged in this, it's not going to mean anything to you. And you're not learning to listen to your own inner self. So that was so key to what was going on at Unarius and for these videos. And then this concept of Satan, if you really look at the history of where Satan came from, quote unquote, and you go back and you study it, and it's through many cultures, it's not just in Christianity, they talk about this fallen angel. And in Unarius, what we came to realize is, yes, that is a valid story. And it's not just myth, it's not just some superstition that happened and somebody made something up. But there were souls that have advanced beyond the normal level of consciousness and then turned around and used that in a negative way. And Satan was one of those beings. And one of the students who contacted Unarius in 1958 or so, his name was Von Spiegel. He realized that he had been one of these souls, these fallen angels, and he took on that mantle of being a Satan. And people say, well, how do you know that? How do you know that? That's something he had to validate for himself, and something he realized and recognized because of how many inhibitions and problems he had. And without going too deeply into it, because it could take another hour of discussion, it was validated not by his own recognition and by Uriel, who said to him, you got this really clear part of you that's just amazing, and then you got this other part that's really dark and nasty. Why the dichotomy here? What's going on? And through her awareness and his awareness, and then at a certain point she actually went to psychic outside of Unarius and said, read his past life for me. And without saying anything, that psychic said, oh my God, this guy is negative. And so to help him gather more in and say, so he couldn't just say, well, maybe that's just a story. He validated it. This outside psychic validated how much karma the soul had incurred by being a negative individual. Now the wonderful thing is that it's not that you've been awful and bad on you and you're going to be in hell forever. The whole idea is that each one of us has lived lives that we're not so happy about. I mean, you think about it. We've lived in religious societies and civilizations that they're not good. And we've done things that aren't so good. The whole idea is that we can grow from that and move beyond that, and that's what he did. And so at the end, before Ruth Norman made her transition, the person who was by her side was the one who was Satan. And he loved her. Loved her. And stuck with her, and it was a beautiful thing, because so often I was there when she would give him deflations, trying to help break down that huge ego he had. And he did. He had an obnoxious ego. And she'd help break it down in front of everybody. And I remember sitting there at times and just listening to it and going, man, I could not have taken that. And he stuck with it, and stuck with it, and stuck with it. And in the end, he went from being one of the most obnoxious people I'd ever met to being a loving, wonderful person. By the time he left this world, he was just a wonderful guy. So
by the time I arrived in 1987, he'd gone through pretty much this metamorphosis. I had a different experience with him, and sometimes there were definitely some we call sandpaper, because I had things to learn about myself with my past relationships with this person. But one of the things I really appreciated is, wow, if this person could be the one that was a fallen angel and Satan, and stick with it, and take what we're learning and apply it to themselves, and take these deflations, what a wonderful example. My negative past is not nearly as strong as this person, and if he can do it, I can do it. And I think that was a great inspiration, and also just realizing that all of us have a higher self and a lower self. All of us have an angel and a Satan within. So who's to point the finger and say, ooh, you're the worst guy, gal of them all?
Very quickly, any questions out there people have? Yes?
I got a question. Was there ever like a relationship or crossover members between Unarius and like Manly P. Hall School, or like Van Tassel and the Integratron, because they're all Southern California?
no, there wasn't. Many of the students who were involved with Unarius in the early, I like to call them the early years, my early years, which was 76 to like 88 or so, when Van Tassel was much more well known in the UFO circuit, and Dansky as well. There were students that knew of them and had visited their schools, but there wasn't really any going back and forth at all. Unarius was just doing its own thing, and some of these students who had been involved in that before they got involved in Unarius, that was the only way that I even heard about it.
Yep, in the middle.
I wanted to ask.
Yep, go ahead.
I wanted to ask, how does the math of reincarnation work? I mean, if there's more people on the planet now than have ever been alive ever, how does that work?
This is not the only planet with life on it.
Yep, go ahead.
Well, me?
Yeah.
Yeah, did how many folks were there, and did you live communally and a couple of houses, or do you live separately? What was that like? How did you work, and what sort of money did you earn?
It's changed throughout the years, but at its peak, I would say, at the actual center, there's probably about 55 to 60 students who were coming to classes regularly. And we didn't live communally, but, you got along with certain people, and so there would be I lived in an apartment complex, and there was probably, I don't know, 6 other people in the same apartment complex.
Took
But
over an apartment complex and kind of did roommate
roulette.
Yeah, when we once recognized what a past lifetime was with our roommate, because we would be drawn to work something out, then the cycle would be over. And then we would do that, and after a while, it was kind of interesting.
Just think Melrose Place, except Unarius. One more question. Yeah, go ahead.
Great. Are you aware of Frank Spencer Oliver's book of the late 19th century and the connection between Lemuria and Mount Shasta and the people that lived apparently in this underground civilization?
I have not read that.
Or do you know about the Lemuria-Mount Shasta connection?
Yes, I have heard that.
And are you
Yes.
folks in contact with those?
Unarius did its own thing with the realizations of the past civilization of Lemuria. And we run into some people every once in a while who talk about their understandings of what Lemuria is, Mount Shasta, and the peoples living there, and that type of thing. And there's actually, right outside of San Diego, there is the Lemurian Fellowship. But there's never any intermingling.
And also, I wanted to mention that when we went through the Lemurian cycle as a group, and we became aware of our past lifetimes during that time, there are 6 volumes of books of testimonials and information that was channeled from von Spiegel or Antares and Uriel about that time. So you can read about all of the realizations from then.
Yeah.
I know we have to,
Yeah, go ahead.
before we do, I'm wondering if Kevin could just give a little bit of information on the arrival,
Exactly.
which we're about to see, because it had, the special effects that you're going to see are no budget special effects, and could you give them details about what the arrival is and the effects?
Okay, this is as other people have said, this is Unarius's masterwork. It's a wonderful film. These days, anybody who's been involved with filmmaking, you need a special effect. What do? You go to your computer, and I can do special effects now. But all the special effects you'll see in this movie were done inside the camera. That means that when you see, what you will see, the circle of stars coming at you, that film went through that camera up to 60 times to get that effect to happen. And there is a warehouse next door at the Unarius Center where we had the film lab and the video lab next to each other, and we were just going all the time making movies and video. And for about 4 months, there was tracks on the floor in that film lab where he took that camera and had holes punched in in his door up to the film lab, where he just kept doing this with that camera to get that effect. And so that's just one thing. And then you'll see the spaceship in this movie. That spaceship is about 3 feet wide. And when you see it, and we made it, and when you see it, it's pretty amazing what the filmmaker was able to do with that. And there's actually a whole retrospective that you can take a look at. I think it's on YouTube, Unarius 33, our YouTube channel, where I talk about my experiences, and all of us were just volunteering. Essentially, this movie you're about to see was made on about $10,000.
16 millimeter.
Yeah, and it was an amazing time to do very creative things.
Oh, one thing too. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Sorry.
It's scripted, right? This is the one scripted
Yes,
film.
this is the one scripted film. And Dan, what is Dan's last name?
Smith.
Thank you. Dan Smith, who is Zan in the film, wrote this going to Grossmont College, taking a filmmaking or film script writing class. And then Ruth Norman read it and said, oh my gosh, we've got to make a movie about this. And from that came the Roots of the Earthman film, which is all of us taking part in no script, but also coinciding directly with that was The Arrival, which was Dan's contact with Space Fleet, or Space Brothers, in pre-Lemurian, actually, time. So this is his story that he remembered psychically, and then wrote it out, and then was scripted. Now, there are parts of it that were not scripted, but the great majority of it was. But still, as you watch this, there are scenes where it was just, we were out there and at the land filming, and here's the scene, ready, set, go. So it's pretty amazing.
Okay, and just want to point out too that every single person who worked on the film volunteered,
Absolutely.
right? And it's just a complete communal effort.
It was.
An amazing thing. It's hard to even imagine it, right? Anything else?
Oh yeah, one more thing. If you really like the film and you want to get a copy of it, also there's a copy of the making of The Arrival. You can actually buy it directly through the Unarius website.
Thank you all for being here. Enjoy The Arrival.